The Silent Departure. The Grand Hall of the Sovereign Assembly stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal, a monument to thousands of years of galactic civilization. Representatives from 64 species occupied their designated platforms, each positioned according to their species' age and perceived contribution to the galaxy. At the very bottom, on a small platform barely large enough for 2 individuals, stood Ambassador Lisa Chen of Earth. She had traveled 14 light-years to deliver this presentation. Her hands trembled slightly as she activated the holographic display, not from nervousness, but from exhaustion. 3 years of research, 18 months of verification, countless sleepless nights analyzing data that painted a terrifying picture. The Void Cascade was coming, a phenomenon that would tear through their galaxy like a storm through paper, and humanity had the proof. The hologram flickered to life, showing massive energy readings, gravitational anomalies, and predictive models. Chen's voice was steady as she explained the data. The Void Cascade was not a natural phenomenon, but the remnant of an ancient weapon, still active, still destructive, moving through space at a fraction of light speed. It would reach the outer colonies in 8 months, the core worlds in 14 months. Without preparation, billions would die. Prime Architect Zelthon was the first to respond. His species, the Korthoxy, had been spacefaring for 12,000 years. They considered themselves the architects of galactic civilization, and Zelthon embodied that pride perfectly. His multiple eyes focused on Chen with something between amusement and contempt. "The humans see shadows again," Zelthon announced, his voice amplified across the hall. Laughter rippled through the assembly. "Your species has been part of this assembly for merely 40 years. 40 years? My people were building stellar gates when your ancestors lived in caves. Do you truly believe you have discovered something we would miss?" Chen felt the familiar weight of dismissal settle on her shoulders. She had experienced this for the entire decade she had served as Earth's ambassador. Every human proposal rejected, every warning ignored, every contribution minimized. She took a breath and tried again. "Prime Architect, the data is conclusive. We have sensor records from 17 different outposts. The energy signature is consistent with historical records from the vanished archives. This is real." Another representative spoke up, a crystalline being named Mithara. "Ambassador Chen, humanity's technological development is impressive for such a young species, but you lack context. You lack historical perspective. What you interpret as a threat is likely a natural stellar phenomenon. We have seen countless such events. The galaxy is older and stranger than you understand." Chen looked around the hall. Not a single species was taking her seriously. The Valdrine delegation was whispering among themselves, clearly entertained. The Hexeron representative had actually turned away, no longer bothering to listen. The Sovereign Assembly had made its judgment before she even began speaking. She closed her presentation files and stood in silence for a moment. Back on Earth, the Human Council had prepared for this outcome. They had hoped the Assembly would listen, but they had planned for rejection. Chen had her instructions. "The human delegation," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the dismissive murmurs, "hereby announces Earth's immediate withdrawal from the Sovereign Assembly. Effective immediately, all human personnel, technology, and support will be removed from Assembly space. We wish you well." The laughter stopped. The silence lasted perhaps 5 seconds before Zelthon spoke again, his tone patronizing. "Ambassador Chen, there is no need for dramatic gestures. Your species is emotional. We understand this. Take time to reconsider. The Assembly will be here when you calm down." But Chen was already walking toward the exit. Her assistant, Marcus Webb, followed her. Behind them, the Assembly was already moving to the next agenda item. They believed humanity would return in a few days, embarrassed and apologetic. They had seen human frustration before. This seemed no different. What they did not see was the coordinated operation beginning across 300 star systems. On the research station orbiting Kelvin Prime, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo received a coded message, Protocol Exodus. She had practiced this scenario 100 times. Within minutes, every human researcher on the station was packing their personal belongings. Within an hour, they were deleting files, wiping databases, and disabling equipment. Within 3 hours, they were boarding transport ships. The station director, a Corthoxy scientist named Velix, did not notice until the humans were gone. He assumed they were attending some human cultural event. It was not until he tried to access the genetic sequencing database that he realized something was wrong. Every file was corrupted. Every backup was encrypted with quantum locks that would take centuries to break. 30 years of research, gone.
On the military installation at Targus 7, Commander James Rodriguez gave the same order to his personnel. 200 human soldiers, technicians, and strategists began their withdrawal. They took nothing that belonged to the assembly, but they took everything they had built, modified, or improved. The defense grid they had designed went dark. The communication relay they had optimized stopped functioning. The tactical AI they had programmed shut down completely. General Krethix of the Assembly Defense Force did not understand what was happening until Rodriguez's ship was already departing. "Commander, you cannot leave without proper authorization," Krethix transmitted. Rodriguez's response was brief and professional. "Our authorization comes from Earth, General. We no longer serve the Assembly. Good luck." Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. Human engineers left shipyards, taking with them the modifications that made assembly vessels faster and more efficient. Human doctors left medical facilities, and the diagnostic systems they had improved began failing. Human traders closed their operations, and suddenly trade routes that had run smoothly for decades became chaotic. Human diplomats departed from contested zones, and long-standing disputes immediately flared into violence. The Assembly did not notice for 3 days. They were too large, too old, too confident. When the first reports reached the central government, they were dismissed as minor administrative issues. By the end of the first week, the reports were impossible to ignore. Chancellor Vorton called an emergency session. The hall was filled with confused and increasingly worried representatives. "Where are the humans?" someone asked. The question had no easy answer. They had simply vanished. Every embassy empty, every human-staffed position abandoned, every shared project halted. Zelfon stood before the assembly, his usual confidence shaken. "This is temporary," he insisted. "The humans are making a statement. They will return once they realize they need us more than we need them." But the problems continued to multiply. A power distribution network on Valdrin collapsed, causing blackouts across an entire continent. The network had been designed by Valdrin engineers, but a human named Patricia Moss had quietly fixed a fundamental flaw in the system 8 years ago. No one had bothered to document her fix. No one understood what she had done. Without her maintenance, the flaw returned and cascaded through the entire network. On Hexaron, a food production facility stopped operating. The automated systems had been installed by Hexaron technicians, but a human team had reprogrammed the efficiency algorithms, increasing output by 40%. The Hexaron engineers had never bothered to learn how the new algorithms worked. They simply enjoyed the increased production. Now the systems were reverting to their original, less efficient programming, and no one knew how to restore the improvements. The Sovereign Assembly's communication network began experiencing delays and failures. Messages took hours instead of minutes. Important transmissions were lost entirely. An investigation revealed that human technicians had been quietly maintaining and upgrading the network for 2 decades. They had fixed bugs, optimized routing, and improved security. The Assembly's own engineers had grown dependent on this invisible support. Without it, the ancient network was collapsing under its own complexity. Chancellor Vorton called for a comprehensive assessment. The report took 2 weeks to compile, and its contents were devastating. Humanity had been integrated into virtually every critical system in assembly space. They had not conquered or dominated. They had simply worked, quietly and efficiently, making everything better. Food production, energy distribution, medical care, transportation, defense, communication, research. In every field, humans had contributed improvements that the assembly now relied upon. The assessment revealed something even more troubling. Humans had never claimed credit for most of their work. They had fixed problems without announcing it. They had improved systems without seeking recognition. They had shared knowledge freely and asked for nothing in return. The assembly had taken all of this for granted, assuming their own superiority was responsible for these improvements. Methra, the crystalline representative who had dismissed Chen's warning, reviewed the data with growing horror. Her own research facility had been operating at 3 times normal efficiency for the past 6 years. She had attributed this to better management. The truth was that a human engineer named David Park had redesigned the facility's workflow and never mentioned it to anyone. He had simply made things better because that was what humans did. Prime architect Zelphon faced the most humbling discovery of all. The stellar construction project he had been overseeing, his pride and legacy, had been on the verge of catastrophic failure 5 years ago. A structural flaw in the design would have caused the entire megastructure to collapse. A human physicist named Dr. Elena Vasquez had identified the flaw and quietly developed a solution. She had presented it to Zelphon's team as a minor optimization suggestion. They had implemented it without understanding its true importance. Zelphon had taken credit for the project's success, never knowing that a human had saved it from disaster. The economic damage was staggering. Trade systems that had functioned smoothly were now chaotic. Currencies fluctuated wildly. Shipping routes became unreliable. 3 minor wars broke out over trade disputes that would have been resolved easily with human mediation. The assembly had not realized that human traders served as neutral intermediaries between species that hated each other. Without that bridge, old enmities resurfaced. A plague began spreading on Korvax Minor, a densely populated industrial world. The disease was not new. Similar outbreaks had occurred in the past and been quickly contained. But now the medical databases were locked. The treatment protocols were inaccessible. Human doctors had maintained and updated these databases for years, adding new research and refining treatments. Without access to that knowledge, Korvax doctors struggled to remember how to treat the plague. The death toll climbed rapidly. 400,000 dead in the first month, 800,000 in the second month.
Chancellor Vorton stood before the assembly and spoke words that none of them wanted to hear. We need the humans. We need them desperately. Without them, our civilization is falling apart. Zelton tried one last defense of assembly pride. We can reverse engineer their technology. We can learn their methods. We do not need to beg. But every attempt at reverse engineering failed. Human technology was not just advanced, it was fundamentally different. It incorporated intuitive leaps, creative solutions, and adaptive algorithms that assembly engineers could not comprehend. Every time they tried to copy human code, it deleted itself. Every time they tried to replicate human designs, critical elements were missing. The humans had not left obvious traps. They had simply built things in ways that required human thinking to understand. 3 months after humanity departed, the Sovereign Assembly faced a truth they had refused to acknowledge for 40 years. They needed humanity far more than humanity needed them. And now, as the Void Cascade continued its approach, they were utterly unprepared to face it alone. The price of arrogance. The Void Cascade appeared first as a distortion in space itself, a ripple that sensors could barely detect. On the outer colony of Thresh 9, a mining outpost with 12,000 inhabitants, the distortion became visible to the naked eye. The stars bent and twisted as if reality itself was folding. Then the energy wave hit.
Thresh-9 vanished in 7 seconds. Not destroyed, not scattered, simply erased. Where a thriving colony had existed, there was now empty space. No debris, no radiation signature, just absence. The phenomenon continued moving inward, directly toward the populated core of assembly space, exactly as Ambassador Chen had predicted 4 months earlier. Chancellor Vorton received the report in his private chambers. He read it 3 times, hoping he had misunderstood, but the data was clear. The void cascade was real, it was massive, it was unstoppable, and the assembly had no idea how to fight it. Emergency sessions were called. Scientists from every species presented theories and potential solutions. The Korthaxi proposed using gravitational deflectors to redirect the cascade. The calculations showed it would require more energy than their civilization could generate in a century. The Valdrines suggested evacuating threatened worlds. The logistics were impossible. They could not move billions of people in the time available. The Hexaron offered to build massive shield generators. The construction time alone would take years they did not have. Every proposal failed. Every solution required technology or resources they did not possess. Worse, their coordination was breaking down. Without human-maintained communication systems, different species were receiving conflicting information. Without human logistic support, resource distribution was chaotic. Without human diplomatic mediation, old grudges were interfering with cooperation. Prime Architect Zelton sat in his chambers surrounded by holographic displays showing system failures across assembly space. Another power grid had collapsed. Another medical facility had shut down. Another trade route had descended into violence. And now this, the Void Cascade. The threat humanity had warned them about. The threat he had laughed at. He thought about Ambassador Chen standing in the Grand Hall trying to warn them. He remembered his own words, "Your species has been part of this assembly for merely 40 years. He had used their youth as evidence of their ignorance. Now their youth looked like the only thing that mattered. Humans saw things differently precisely because they were young. They had not grown complacent. They had not assumed their knowledge was complete.
The Void Cascade consumed another colony, then another. Each one vanished completely. 15 million lives gone. The assembly military tried to fight it. They launched missiles, energy weapons, particle beams. Nothing worked. The cascade was not a physical object. It was a tear in space-time itself, and conventional weapons were useless against it. Matara stood before the Assembly Science Council and delivered the analysis everyone feared. We cannot stop it. Our technology is insufficient. Our understanding is incomplete. If it continues at its current speed, it will reach the core worlds in 9 months. We need humanity's help. The room erupted in protests. Several representatives refused to accept this conclusion. They insisted assembly science was superior. They demanded more time to find a solution. But Matara had reviewed every proposal, every theory, every desperate idea. None of them would work. The Sovereign Assembly, with its 12,000 years of accumulated knowledge, could not solve this problem. Chancellor Vorton made the decision. We will send a delegation to human space. We will request their assistance. Zelfon knew what that meant. They would have to admit they were wrong. They would have to acknowledge human superiority, at least in this area. They would have to beg. The thought burned like acid, but the alternative was extinction.
The delegation was prepared carefully. Vorton would lead it personally, showing the seriousness of their request. Mitara would provide scientific data. Zelphon would represent the Assembly's oldest and most prestigious species. They selected their finest diplomatic vessel and loaded it with gifts, data, and formal apologies. The journey to human space took 12 days. 12 days while the Void Cascade consumed 2 more colonies. 12 days while Assembly systems continued failing. 12 days for the delegation to practice their humility. They reached the border of human territory and were immediately intercepted. 20 human warships appeared around them, materializing from apparently empty space. The delegation had never seen ships like these. They were sleek and dark, covered in technology that made no sense to Assembly sensors. The ships seemed to bend light around themselves, becoming visible only when they chose to be. Admiral Catherine Zhang contacted them from her flagship. Her voice was professional but cold. "Chancellor Vorton, state your purpose." Vorton had prepared a speech, full of diplomatic language and careful phrasing. But looking at Admiral Zhang's expression, he abandoned it. "We need help. The Void Cascade that Ambassador Chen warned us about has arrived. We cannot stop it. Our people are dying. We were wrong to dismiss your warning. We were wrong about many things. We are here to request your assistance." Zhang was silent for a long moment. "Humanity is currently not accepting diplomatic visits. Your ships will need to return to Assembly space." Zelphon could not contain himself. "Admiral, billions will die. Surely humanity understands the urgency." Zhang's expression did not change. "We understood the urgency 4 months ago, when Ambassador Chen presented the data. You laughed at us. Now you expect us to sacrifice our people for yours?" Mitara stepped forward. "Admiral Zhang, you are right. We were arrogant and foolish. But the beings who will die if the cascade continues are not the ones who dismissed you. They are ordinary people who never mocked humanity, children who never laughed at your warnings, families who simply want to live. They do not deserve to die for our mistakes." Something shifted in Zhang's expression. "Wait here," she said, and the communication ended.
The delegation waited for 16 hours. During that time, they watched human ships patrol the border with casual efficiency. The vessels moved in perfect coordination, their technology far beyond anything the Assembly possessed. It was obvious that humanity had been developing advanced systems while serving the Assembly. They had been preparing for this moment. Finally, Zhang contacted them again. "You may proceed to Earth. Your ships will be escorted. Do not deviate from the designated route." The journey to Earth took 3 more days. The delegation passed human colonies and military installations, each one displaying technology that should not exist. Zelphon realized that humanity had been hiding their true capabilities for decades. They had allowed the Assembly to believe them inferior while building something far greater. Earth itself was stunning. The planet gleamed with cities and forests, oceans and mountains. Orbital stations surrounded it like jewels. The delegation was brought to the Human Council chambers, a modest building compared to the Grand Assembly Hall. But the technology here was subtle and sophisticated in ways Zelphon was only beginning to understand. Ambassador Chen was waiting for them. She looked different now, more confident, more at ease. She was home among people who valued her. "Chancellor Vorton, welcome to Earth." Vorton did something no chancellor had done in Assembly history. He knelt. His body touched the floor in a posture of complete submission. "Ambassador Chen, we failed you. We failed our own people. We let pride blind us to truth.
We are here not as partners or allies. We are here as beggars, asking for mercy we do not deserve." Chen looked at him for a long moment, then gestured for him to rise. "Chancellor, humanity will help you, but there are conditions. The Assembly must change, fundamentally change. No more species hierarchy based on age. No more dismissing younger civilizations. No more assuming your ancient knowledge makes you superior. If we fight this cascade, we do it as equals. Can you accept that?" Vorton did not hesitate. "Yes, whatever humanity requires. The old assembly is finished. We will rebuild it correctly." The Human Council convened to discuss the request. The debate was intense. Many humans remembered 40 years of dismissal and contempt. Many questioned why they should risk their lives for species that had treated them as inferiors. But others argued that helping was what separated humanity from the Assembly's arrogance. Humanity chose to be better than those who had hurt them. The decision was made. Humanity would deploy its forces. Admiral Zhang would command the defense. Dr. Michael Torres, humanity's leading physicist, would coordinate the scientific response. Ambassador Chen would serve as liaison between human and assembly forces, ensuring cooperation. Within 24 hours, the human fleet began moving. 300 warships, carriers, support vessels, and mobile research stations. They crossed into assembly space and immediately took command of the defense efforts. Assembly forces were integrated into human tactical structures. Scientists from both sides began sharing data. Engineers worked together to prepare defenses. The difference was immediate and striking. Human commanders made decisions in minutes that assembly officers had debated for days. Human logistics systems coordinated supplies with perfect efficiency. Human technology adapted and improvised in ways assembly equipment could not. The chaos that had paralyzed the assembly's response disappeared under human organization. Dr. Torres studied the void cascade intensely. He deployed sensor networks that could actually track the phenomenon's structure. He ran simulations using quantum computers that processed data faster than assembly systems could comprehend. After 6 days of continuous work, he called a meeting with all senior scientists.
"The cascade is not a weapon," Torres explained, holographic models rotating before them. "It's more like a wound in space-time that never healed. An ancient civilization tried to create a faster-than-light corridor and failed catastrophically. The energy is still trying to complete that corridor, tearing through normal space to do it." Methra studied the models. "Can it be stopped?" "Not stopped, redirected. If we can give the energy a path that doesn't go through inhabited space, it will follow that path. It wants to complete its original function. We just need to show it how." The solution required building massive spatial gates at precise locations, creating an artificial corridor for the cascade energy to follow. It was technically possible, but the construction timeline was impossibly tight. They had 6 weeks before the cascade reached the core worlds. Humanity mobilized like nothing the assembly had ever witnessed. Construction ships worked continuously, building the gates with assembly line precision. Human engineers taught assembly workers new techniques that allowed faster construction. Resource ships supplied materials in perfectly timed deliveries. Defensive fleets protected the construction sites from the cascade's edge effects. Zelton worked alongside a human engineer named Marcus Chen, Ambassador Chen's younger brother. Marcus showed him construction methods that violated everything Zelton had learned in his 2 centuries of life. "Why do you build this way?" Zelton asked. "It seems inefficient." Marcus smiled. "It seems inefficient because you're thinking about how to build it perfectly. We're thinking about how to build it fast. Perfect is the enemy of done, and right now we need done." That philosophy permeated everything humanity did. They did not waste time seeking perfect solutions. They found working solutions and implemented them immediately. They adapted as problems arose rather than planning for every contingency. They moved with a speed and flexibility that assembly species, bound by ancient protocols and rigid thinking, could barely comprehend. The first spatial gate was completed in 11 days. The second took 9 days. The third took 7 days. Humanity was learning and accelerating with each gate. Assembly workers, watching and learning, started thinking differently. They began suggesting innovations. They started improvising solutions. The human approach was contagious. With 4 days remaining before the cascade would reach the first core world, the final gate was positioned. Dr. Torres activated the network. The gates began generating a spatial corridor, offering the cascade energy and alternate path. For several hours nothing changed. The cascade continued its destructive approach. Then, slowly, the phenomenon began to shift. The energy was finding the new path, following the corridor. The cascade bent away from inhabited space, drawn into the artificial channel that Torres had created. It moved through the corridor and eventually dispersed into empty intergalactic space, its energy finally dissipating after millennia of destruction. The war was over, not with weapons or shields, but with understanding and creativity. Humanity had solved in 6 weeks what the Assembly could not solve in 4 months. And they had done it by thinking differently, by refusing to accept that ancient knowledge was always superior to new ideas. Chancellor Vorton stood on Earth, looking at the celebration around him. Human and Assembly people worked together now, genuinely together. He found Ambassador Chen and spoke quietly. "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for being better than we were." Chen nodded. "The old Assembly is dead, Chancellor. Help us build something better. Something where age doesn't determine worth, where different perspectives are valued, where everyone listens to everyone." Vorton looked at the humans around him, the species he had dismissed as too young to matter. They had saved his civilization while teaching it how to change. "We will build it together," he promised. "And this time, we will listen." Across the galaxy, monuments were erected, not celebrating victory, but remembering humility. The inscriptions were simple. "Pride blinds, wisdom listens. May we never forget the difference."